to the Adventuring Party for the first week of December 2024. This week, the party are proficient in all pedantries and digressions, and have more talking points than all but the most barbarous of other podcasts. It's the fighters' turn to be discussed on the Adventuring Party, discussing tabletop and related gaming the Irish way. Welcome to the party. I'm Warlord Scarr, master of blade, axe, and the Mongolian carving knife.
I'm Dave.
And I'm Eoin.
And we're here to continue our exploration of the different archetypes of our fantasy and other RPG paradigms and where they may have came from. And this time we decided we want to go to the very start, from the gaming perspective, the very start, the original 25mm scale lead miniature be pushed around a sand table by one Ernst Gygax before he actually started designing D&D. The fighter, the generic fighting man, an archetype so broad that you can argue that it hasn't survived unmolested to the present day because an awful lot of side classes have resulted from people seeming to want different things from their master of all forms of arms and armor.
So, what sort of different things?
Well, we've already discussed the ranger, where the woodsman emerges as a separate archetype combination superhero and dirty hippie in the woods. We also seen paladins, barbarians, psychic warriors, and other things trying to specialize the general nature of the fighter as good at fight to do specific flavors. But like at the very start, as Gygax came up with first his fantasy supplement to chainmail and had to invent rules for a troll is worth 6 fighting men. And then this superhero is worth 4 fighting men. This superhero is worth 8 fighting men. And then discovered that Mr. Dave Arneson had turned this into a full, not full, but mostly full RPG system. And suddenly the fighting man was an archetype that needed to be fleshed out. And then over the course of 5 editions of the game, it's been fleshed out and the fleshing has budded off into other classes, which sort of leaves the original fighting man of a bit of a lurch.
Yeah.
It's worth mentioning, right, that back then, when he was using the term fighting men, he wasn't referring to man who likes to fight. It was like a term used to describe an old army, where I have, how many people do you have? I've got 1,800, 1,200 fighting men, which means that the other 600 were camp followers, blacksmiths, seamstresses, hucksters, physicians, that kind of thing, extra hangers on.
Yeah.
But I have 1,200 fellas who'll pick up weapons and fight if need be. And that was the way kind of describing army strength, because this all spills out of chainmail originally, where you had pikemen and spearmen and bowmen and so on, and they kind of combined into the fighting man.
And the thing about chainmail, and this again is research, I haven't played chainmail myself, very few people have, but have read reports and breakdowns of the rules. And the thing about chainmail was it was the origin of the not only the AC lists that we have today, but also of the infamous weapon versus armor tables that plagued the original PHB, where a lot of chainmail's combat resolution was a given unit of fighting men would have a certain type of armor and a certain type of weapon, and you would cross-reference your armor versus weapon on various tables in order to get your target number. I think it was a 2d6 system originally. Yes, basically it was a look up armor versus weapon on a table to find your target number. Presumably there were other modifiers for outnumbering, etc., etc. And for 1971, I believe, was chainmail. This was a modern innovation, almost scary to some of the more classic Napoleonic warfare people, but it seems a bit primitive now. But this sort of carried over into the war game in a certain way.
Wasn't this really like an attempt at producing a combined arms metagame, where certain types of units were better against certain other types of unit.
In a sense, yeah. But it was. I think that the real crux was that the Napoleonic warfare was the paradigm at the time. Wargaming was basically Napoleonics or nothing, and Gygax was trying to create more rules for medieval wargaming. And then one thing led to another, and the ideas in Chainmail started bleeding into D&D as himself and Dave Arneson worked on it. And I mean, there's the infamous example of how the D20 system that we know today started as the alternative system. If you couldn't bring yourself to purchase by mail order a copy of Chainmail in order to run your D&D game, we provide this alternative combat system with D20s because we think D20s are cool. They're brand new, don't you know?
They were selling probability dice.
But the thing you look at is that at the time, the fighting man had transitioned from wargame unit to adventurer a bit clunkily and was sort of relying on the fact that early DMs were expected to just assume competence in your fighting man, assume that they are a decent woodsman, assuming that they are high class enough that these people can treat them like a knight once they get to like level 7 or whatever, and good at swinging the sword, but also all the other weapons because they have to stand out for the common footman who could barely hold his spear properly. But the thing is, you still had this very broad archetype that the game at the time didn't mechanically emphasize stuff like woodsman skills, survival skills, social skills, and therefore the fighter was left with just their combat skills as their mechanical focus. And as the game expanded and people started wanting mechanical focuses and their things, the spin-off classes sort of came out of that need. People felt a need that paladins needed to be different from fighters. It couldn't just be a fighting man who's a bit religious. You had to have various holy powers, etc., etc. And the ranger comes out of this thing because we can't just assume now that the thief is out and skills are a thing. We have to have mechanics for being good at the forest, and can't just assume that most people in a medieval setting would know how to follow a basic trail or find some berries in the woods. They need mechanics for that. And so the fighter marched on with their very basic mechanical loadout of abilities, such as they were, and other classes sort of grew around them with more specialized, more specific fantasies, I guess is one way of putting it.
Well, more granular though, like like because like say in a war game, like it's not going to be terribly relevant to have like those, as you say, those woodland skills or social skills, but in a role playing game, the focus is a lot smaller. Like it's more tightly focused on one or a handful of characters.
Yeah, you're dealing with different fantasies coalescing where some people saw the fighter and immediately thought, "Oh, this is Conan." So by proxy of being Conan, we can assume a certain level of competence at was it fieldcraft, I guess is the term, a fieldcraft, or we could assume a certain amount of rage or zeal, or they can just assume that's part of their better hit roll. But as the game became more developed and new classes started to emerge, that stopped being the paradigm. The paradigm was now, oh, you picked the right class for the type of fantasy that you wanted, and the fighter was sort of your generic fallback. If you didn't have exactly what you wanted, you could just assume, oh, the fighter is the default to play a fighter or a thief, depending on how bad your stat rolls were. Because I think there was a way in first ed to roll so badly you couldn't be a fighter and you had to be a thief instead.
There used to be minimum strength requirements.
Yeah.
As far as I recall, to be a fighter or be a certainly I think in early AD&D. I'm not sure before that. I would have to do a severe brush up on my different iterations of the very earliest of the D&Ds, which I'm not super familiar with. I was just doing a bit of like background research on this, and the original hit tables and stuff were published in the Doomsday Book fanzine that was produced by Gygax.
Oh.
And the original kind of to hit tables were published by an anonymous contributor Gary Gygax lost the name of and had to ask whose rules are these and published them.
Oh god.
And that became the foundation of the early to hit tables, which were kind of really part of the origin of chainmail.
Wow.
You know, Gygax mysteriously losing credit from somebody else. He didn't forget to put his name on it, though.
Yeah.
I guess he wasn't too careful.
There you go. Well, back then it was a fanzine. He was probably producing it in his work and sipping it out. Back in the old days, we just like photocopy a bunch of stuff and send it off there. There's the fanzine, lads. Away we go. Back in the old days.
Yeah.
I think the fighter is originally as you say, a very broad thing, and then over time we look at like the ranger. Who does the ranger arise from?
Aragorn mainly.
Aragorn, a lot of the time, because Aragorn is literally, he's literally a ranger. But the fighter, the fighting man, was originally a lot of stuff, and then kind of becomes a specific piece. Because every other one of the pieces you get initially in D&D, the cleric and the magic user, are doing different jobs, very different jobs. And the vampire, I think, probably lost out because to an extent it was, I'm the fighting man, but better. I think that's why it didn't make it all the way along. And the rogue was apparently another submission that people came up with.
Yeah. Someone posted their rules in a fanzine. Hopefully, Gygax asked permission before reproducing it in the supplements. But as I said, it was the Wild West back then.
Yeah.
But yeah, and a lot of people will lay it at the feet of the rogue the idea of skills, all competences of your characters need to be put in some mechanical terms or they're not real. Which is, you can understand why people at the time who just assumed, well, my character's a fighter, so clearly he has some basic woodsmanship skills. But then after the thief came around, he couldn't assume that anymore. But at the same time, it was a major step forward in the development of RPG mechanics and how we think about RPGs and how characters expressed. So it pretty much an inevitable outcome anyway. But as things went along, and then certainly thinking to second out was when this really started, is that the fighter started because there was more archetypes, and even though I think second ed really put the fighter as the base class from which all the paladins and barbarians came from, even with that, there was still this growing sense that the generic fighter didn't have enough identity of its own because it could do everything. It didn't have a specific thing, and there became more and more of a push to allow you to specialize your fighter. I think this is where the skills and powers books of late second ed came in.
That rings true.
Yeah, that later lead into the very feat focused version that we had in third ed, where the idea was that you had your basic combat skills, you were proficient in all weapons, you had best base attack bonus, pretty good hit points, terrible saves, we won't worry about that now, we'll never address that. And then you would assume you pick your feats and thus build like Legos your perfect fighter over the course of however many levels. We could dive into how that didn't really pan out because of the way third ed was, and also because basically you didn't actually have any unique abilities until like level 5 or something. It also further forced you to focus entirely on combat feats because you needed to build up your feat trees. Perhaps but I think the point is that that was sort of the emphasis that certainly D&D went with. Stuff like RuneQuest and MERP, because they'd stepped back from the class archetype, they were the other. You would say that's not wrong to say. It's that the likes of Middle Earth role playing and RuneQuest were sort of trying to do the alternative D&D in the 80s, right? That's not wrong to say.
No, but I think they were also trying to be a little less abstracted than D&D was.
Yeah, because they had percentile skill systems, and while there were certain archetypes that they were not using classes or that type of restriction.
Because if you don't have wizards and clerics, like if you go class-based and you go, okay, everyone's got their own little silo of abilities, you get away with that. But if you want to do, I've got, we've actually got like, just all fighters is perfectly valid. If you go just all fighters is perfectly valid, what you end up needing to do is expanding the design space for fighting to replicate the fact that some people fight with different weapons. And I think one of the biggest issues in the modern iteration of RPGs is we've pared down too much of that very flavorful difference to nothing. The weapons are just a damage code. This is magic users and clerics kind of dreams. Like, oh, that bit should be pared down. We don't need all these different weapon tables. And we don't need different types of weapons, different damage codes or different weapons. Just one damage code. And you pared everything down, and you put yourself in a situation where the fighter's available design space has shrunk way down. And you're trying to replicate it with feats and other things like that. And like even like in Fifth Ed, what does the fighter get that's different to everybody else? They get more attacks, and that's the only way they can. That's the only toggle they have left to flick on the fighter. Really,
There's subclasses, but yeah, that's a whole other thing. That's again, you're sort of relying on the fighter not being a normal fighter, quote unquote.
and most of those subclasses are I can cast spells.
Yeah, the class spells.
Yeah, because magic is just everywhere in Fifth Ed.
Yeah, there's the very light version with Book of Nine Swords with the tactician fighter. Oh, shit, I used to know this. No, well, the Space the Warblade. What's the name of the fighter that has superiority dice?
Oh, Battlemaster.
The Battlemaster, yes. And then there's a champion who just has a whole bunch of passive abilities because there are some people who want to be me hit man with sword. But what I'm going with is that this is sort of the cost of 50 years of backwards pressure on fighters is that because everything needs to be mechanically expressed now, the fighter as a generic package needs to provide ways for people to express themselves and to say, I am the fighter, I fight in these ways. And you basically can't be the jack of all trades anymore because who's the jack of all trades? Who fights with both a great sword and a spear and a bow and throwing daggers?
Gallowglass. Gallowglass fights like that. a traditional Irish warrior. He's a squire to carry all his different weapons. Like, hand me my greatsword, but to go to work,
I'll say I've gotten quite I like the look of systems that actually try to buck that trend of oversimplifying weapon systems. I know that Codex Martialis is an interesting attempt to add such things into 5e. Designer apparently has a lot of experience with HEMA, historical European martial arts. So it looks like it should work well in play. Haven't gotten to try it out yet, but it looks interesting.
Yeah, and the 2024 edition apparently has a new, let's say, weapon abilities thing where if someone is a fighter or similarly specialized in weapon, they can unlock a special bonus feature of the weapon. So it's still mostly just damage coded one or two keywords, but if you're a good fighter, you get to have the special ability of each weapon, which sounds good. Haven't seen it in action myself, but it is certainly showing that this is the trend things are going. But again, that sort of implies that fighters are just sort of the victims of design trends in the way that like people as a blank slate, people feel that they can mechanically experiment with them.
I think fighters have always had a slight issue of RPG players being quite often nerdy people, and in the very caste-based system that is the US, being very nerdy puts you in a particular slot. And this is to a certain extent the nerds' revenge of the nerds on the football players. And these meatheads just because there's definitely an element of that to some of it, The fighter at times has been the dumb class who just is there to basically stand in the front line and get beat up, while the wizard actually wins the fight. And I've seen kind of reactionary stuff to that. People say, "Oh, the fighter should be the master of combat." And I'm like, dudes, you can't have one class be the untrammeled victor in combat, an entire pillar of the game. And given how D&D is often a victim of quite lackluster design in some ways, it'll end up being, the entire game is dominated by fighters just fighting each other, and everyone else is kind of sitting around cheering them on. And I'm like, that's not how the game works at all. You can't do D&D where there are whole aspects of the game which only one class gets the thing. Like, it'd be like saying, okay, this is a skill thing, so only rogues can do it. Fighters, wizards, clerics, you have to just sit and watch while the rogue does stuff.
There are rogue players who do think that, and you do see sometimes a phenomenon of people saying, well, it makes sense for my character to be the ones talking, but the rogue has plus 17 to diplomacy, so clearly they should go do the talking. We've had a previous episode about this, but there's a sort of fight between what's good play and what's optimal play. And, if quotes about fun and optimization have been bandied around at certain points.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's funny sometimes that we've gone down particular design and development cul-de-sacs, and we're now trying to reverse out of them. And it's difficult because you have to fight against the inertia of people going, you can't just start adding stuff back in. And they're adding stuff back in the most awkward way possible, which is to put in additional keywords because they want the game to be simple to learn, but then you put in keywords, so there's a whole extra layer of stuff you got to learn afterwards. So it ends up just getting more complex later on.
Here's the thing, this is a side tangent, but like when people say they want a simple game, I think they actually will probably prefer a game with more complicated rules but less keywords and less spells. I don't think the problem is how many dice do I roll. I think the problem with people saying a game is complicated to learn is how much content they have to memorize.
Look, with learning things is difficult, and nobody ever wants to learn anything. They would be happiest in a world where they never had to learn anything new. And you've got to trick people into learning new things. A very small percentage of people actually want to learn new things. Most people are happy just knowing everything they know currently and never having to engage with learning again. You have to understand that about people, and you have to subtly bully them into learning new stuff. One of the things you'll need to do is you need to make it easier, more approachable to learn. And it's weird because rulebooks are textbooks. So you should steal good ideas from textbooks about how to teach people things. And diagrams are important for that. Like, diagrams aren't there for attractive art to sell the book. That's what people think they are. No, diagrams are about explaining a piece of information in a visual medium that a different type of learner will pick up from. I saw a great little illustration in a traveller book the other day, which was of what it meant to have a spaceport, a downport, and a space dock, and where each different ship goes in. And I thought, oh, that's very good, because that's a learning tool for a more visual learner. If I say space dock, that's where you are. If I say spaceport, that's where you are. If I say, down dock, that's where you are. And that's why you would go there. And that's an important kind of aspect to it. When you make it all text, it makes it very difficult for some people. So what you want to do is have better learning goals. And one of the things is you need better character sheets, because a lot of character sheets are very bad at actually presenting the information. Instead of putting the information players would need in front of them, they put the information in the textbook, or they put it on the GM's reference guide, the screen in front of them. So the GM can tell them what to do. But that kind of infiltrizes the player, where they have to remember the stuff themselves. Why aren't the common combat modifiers on the combat page of the player's character sheet, so they can refer to that themselves? There's too much, your character sheet should only be one page. You should only be half a page. Yeah, your character sheet should be a little book of notes that you can flip to a different page and refer to a different set of stuff.
Yeah, character sheet should be as large as it needs to be useful to the player, and no smaller, no larger.
But I don't have a photocopier. I need to put it on these post-it notes that I stole from work.
I had to hand inscribe this on a 2-cent piece delivered to me. Look, some people want to play 2-up, where you flip 2 coins and bet if they're going to come down or not, at some point, I will always draw the line between the difference between complicated and complex. And complicated is the vice and complex is the virtue, where there's a lot of choices to be made. Some people don't want to engage much with mechanics. They're there for kind of the vibe and the feel and the hanging around and chatting. It's grand. But for me, a game needs to be a game. That's my consistent through line on all RPGs. Games need to be games. There need to be choices there, and your choices should have consequences. And you should feel good when you make a good choice, and you should feel bad when you make a bad choice. That's part of the game. Man, I should not have used a single target attack there. I should have used an AoE. That's the game. And not having that, everyone is equally valid. Every choice is equally valid. No.
That's going to be boring very fast.
You strip all your consequences out of your game, the board game gets boring. So to get back to the fighter. The fighter is a difficult argument about what the fighter is actually good at and what the fighter wants to happen in a game. Because some of them want to be the best and to fight other people in honorable, melee combat, or, maybe range combat, but usually they mean melee combat, where, they can fight each other, like men, steel on steel sort of thing. And the question on our Discord raised the thing of the fighter wants to play the Dark Souls-like game of skill, martial weapons, and triumph over monsters. But the game has other ideas. And I think to some people, because I definitely see a younger group of players coming in to RPGs and asking for things like builds that they want. Okay, how do I do a dagger build? In games where wizards aren't as much of an assumed 1/3 or 1/4 of the party or clerics, they'll sometimes come in and go, hey, how do I do a dagger build? And I remember this coming up with people coming to Wolfrop channels and asking a lot, and I was like, oh man, there's only actually a small number of weapons which are like meta, and then the other ones are fine, but they're not really actually very good. And they want a more diverse, they want to have a dagger build. And if you come into D&D and be like, I want a dagger build on my fighter, and you're like, oh. I mean, I think that'd be the response, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I think the closest to that was, again, back in the Third Ed days, but like, oh yeah, you can make a dagger build, just buy 300 euros worth of hardback supplements and find one feat from each of them and combine them together, and you too could be Knifey Joe, Master of Knives.
I don't think even in Third Ed there was a really good dagger build. I mean, it was mostly everyone just used short swords because they were like D6 and put D4.
I did make a dagger specialist for a Third Ed game, but it took like 2 base class. I think it was Rogue Swashbuckler going into a dagger focused prestige class, and honestly, I was expending a lot of effort to make a concept viable. Not great.
Whereas, you just take wizard and win is the alternative option.
Yeah, but I find that a bit dull.
Part of the other issue is that it's the when do I become my thing? Because Fifth Ed sort of said, oh, you become your thing at 3rd level, and levels 1 and 2 are the training wheels before where you use what is, your longsword, your shield, because it's tutorial time. And then at level 3, you just suddenly become a battle master. The paladin actually finally promises to be nice to people or mean people. Nothing happens at level 3. I think they've sort of tried pushing that back with the other edition, but I still think they're still aiming for level 3 is when things get going. But like, it was much worse in stuff like we say that Third Ed was really flexible. You often, like, if your character concept relied on feats or more likely on prestige class, then you probably were a very bad version of your intended idea until you were like level 7 or 8. When most Fifth Ed games are finishing, you would finally become, I am finally Knife Master, master of short stabbing implements.
If you're trying to be a combined arcane divine caster, like, you'd have a bit of, okay, I've got to get 2nd level spells in both these classes. So there'll be a early game, uninterrupted, it's okay. Then there's this bit where 3 or 4 levels, I'm terrible. And then it'll start to take off. But, I mean, that's the thing. I think people are coming in from different backgrounds looking to play like a game like Dark Souls, where it is a lot about weapons and matchups, and something that D&D doesn't particularly handle terribly well. I mean, the question said D&D is a game that hates itself and the players, but not in the way you might think. Where it's got, you come in wanting to do one thing with the fighter and like, oh, you really don't. Really, realistically, sword versus spear, there's no difference, is there? And if you have ever been in a fight against a guy with a spear in real life, none of you have, because why would you? You're not a lunatic. You suddenly realize that it's a very different thing. And if you play a game like Dark Souls, which takes elements of that and brings it into the game, suddenly the idea that all these weapons are kind of identical in play is crazy. Like, it's like, that's not what it feels like at all. And I'm absolutely convinced it's a nettle that RPGs are going to have to grasp and actually modernize the design a bit there, because there's too much time is being spent kind of going, oh, we're just going to shy away from the harder rules and do the easier sort of rules. And I'm like, oh, guys, come on. We can do this. We have so much experience. We've got so many other games to look at.
Sorry, folks, this is really turning into a game design. But that's kind of the thing, is that because the fighter is the blank slate upon which game design gets forced, that sort of leads into this. But part of the thing is Pathfinder and Fifth Ed are currently the big honchos to any fantasy game, and they have their own approaches to these issues. But a lot of the what we might call innovation might not be the right word, but a lot of the push for other takes on the archetypes is being done by the indie OSR people, and their emphasis is not on I do my build, I replicate my favorite game. Their emphasis is on getting their dungeon crawling vibes or otherwise bring across their setting, and the character customization is meant to happen through what they term diegetic advancement. Like the things that happen in the game is what customizes your character, and therefore they don't have. There's some attempts. I believe there was that game you mentioned, Dave, where every class was in 4 pieces, and you chop and change to create your archetype.
Oh yes. 1 second.
Weird Wizard or Shadow of the Demon Lord? Shadow of the Demon Lord does you level up in one class early on, and then you basically staple on another one.
I don't think it was either of those, but
Well, no, the one I Shade's mentioning is Neoclassical Geek Revival. But it is an interesting one if you want to mine it for ideas for, well, a lot of ideas in it.
yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is that your poster child for like sort of making a build at the moment is Pathfinder Second. I don't know how good knife specialists are in Pathfinder Second Ed. I assume there's something you can do as the SOD for that game grows exponentially over time.
I imagine there's a way to put it together.
There's a lot of different builds in it, you know.
And I imagine something has come out. D&D is trapped by its own success, basically, and therefore their ability to innovate and give more detailed mechanics to the fighter is limited. And like this weapons superiority, is it, or weapons mastery? Their new system for basically adding an extra ability to weapons is probably what they think is the best they can do, because it's add on a little bit more content, a little more special things for the players. That'll do, right? Whereas what we're looking for is essentially like alternative to Pathfinder Second Ed, where you can start off with a not super specialized but still competent and also unique fighter or equivalent, and then further specialize as you go through your adventuring career. And there's just not as many games trying to do that. Certainly not for the generic fighting man, anyway. I mean, I'm sure as we post this, we will suddenly be inundated with people proselytizing their own favorite systems that have overcome these challenges and done great things in the stabbing person demographic.
Don't doubt it.
But yeah, that just seems to be the journey of the origin and the development of the fighter as sort of the what can we do with our mechanics in this edition class. And much as the development of fantasy role playing has gone various different ways, the fighter remains the
favored weapon,
the Ford truck that you can staple weapons onto. Geez, the technical of classes, reliable, but maybe never reliable, and sometimes very interesting to look at, but never exactly the jet fighter of the whole.
The Garrett Jacks of classes. If you remember your Shannara,
Wow.
Garrett Jacks is the weapons master, the fighter and assassin for hire who shows up, and his whole thing is, master of all weapons and none. And they have to fight none. Basically, they're being chased with these unkillable kind of super werewolves, and he ends up because he becomes this character everyone remembers, where he basically has to fight one of these things. They run off and he manages to kill one of them. I was like, how he dies in the process, but I was like, how do you do it? They don't even show it on the screen. It's like he found a way,
Oh man, it's been a while since I've read the Scarr books. I mostly remember the elves being genocided by an unstoppable wave of demons.
That'll do it.
Yeah, but that was a while ago. But yeah, no, the thing is, there are these kinds of archetypes if you go looking for them. People like experts like Garrett Jacks. There was a fellow like the really strong knight in the there was another series. What was his name? Pelgrane the Sorceress. What was that? Was it Pelgara the Sorceress? I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember Teenage Beast Reading Habits, which is
Oh boy.
Dave Eddings. What was Dave Eddings' books? Belgariad? Yes, Belgariad. There was like 2 knights in the Belgariad, and one was doing the very noble paladin thing, and one was just a guy in big armor who would kill you. And I remember that first, the second guy way more than I remember the other guy. I'll have to look up their names later. So, folks, I guess the conclusion we're coming to is that the fighter's been around a long time, and they've been through a rough patch, but they're still going. Endurance. That's the reason why everyone thinks they're tanks. Is because they just go through a lot and come out mangled, but still willing to pick up a sword at the end of it.
The one extra thing I want to say, basically, is just that the question on the Discord was, how does the fighter alter the game? That if the fighter wants to play Dark Souls, what are the rest of the party doing when he's playing a Dark Souls game, which is kind of a one-on-one game against a monster? And how do the other party then going to be the supporting players for that? Or are they also going to play a game where the choice of weapons, the choice of your steel matters? And, it's got to be a game of tactics, and we've each got to work as a team. Or the wizard, can I just not cast Fireball on this guy? I really don't want to try and hit him with a stick. Can I just not play range here? And, is the fighter okay with that? It's twisted magic, is Conan a fighter?
Ooh.
Where he just goes, oh, damn wizards.
I mean, there's sort of the different, they have different classes of different methods of puzzle solving where the fighter is, working each individual part of the crossword, whereas the wizard is playing a point-and-click adventure game of use Fireball on man. It can be a bit different. Yeah.
I just think it's an interesting puzzle when someone wants. So I want to have this kind of feeling that we're taking on a single terribly dangerous monster, and we've all got to work as a team to fight it. I'm like, yes, we can do that. That is a possibility that we can indulge in. But I'm going to need to get the old game design tools and have a fiddle with some stuff to get the experience you want out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we discussed possible approaches to making that actually work in an RPG, and it's not trivial.
No, there's a lot to be done to kind of get you there. And I think choice of weapon becoming more important is something the fighter would give a thumbs up to if you gave them the option, where they can be, okay, I can actually specialize, or I can be the person with 3 or 4 weapons and I switch between them based on what's ideal. Squire, hand me my Bakken hammer, I'm gonna hit this guy really hard in the head. Or hand me my armor piercing hammer. I'm gonna try and penetrate the armor. And I think fighters would like some space like that. Whereas a lot of other classes be like, whoa, I used to be fists, man. Let's not be getting into armor penetration here. That's
Well, in that case, you need to get creative. Find a bucket of water and try to drown them in it.
Certainly something like that. I think that's a vote that the fighter would vote for, and that other people might be like, whoa. Let's slow this roll down, baby doll.
And then there's the counterpoint to that, which is I have made this fighter a killer of men, a fighter of many deeds, and the rest of the party is just going to use diplomacy and cantrips to solve every problem in the game up to level 20, and I will never roll initiative. That is the alternative.
Yeah.
The alternative things. And I mean, there's the secondary version of our whole thing of GMs talk to players is that players, please make your expectations of the game known, both to your GM and the other players, so that they know, if you really expect to roll some dice and stab a goblin at some point, that, they're not going to, I have a brilliant idea that will involve never, ever interacting with the rules. If you're planning to do that you may be disappointing some of your fellow party members by doing that.
Or you've got a game of psychics where everyone reads each other's mind before fighting, so everyone can see what their other person's going to do, and you got to resolve it with pure psychic power. And then one player's like, I want to play Decado, the Ice Killer, from David Gemmel's book King Before the Gate, where the top bad guys have that power, but it doesn't matter because he fights faster than thought.
Yeah, Mandoralan was the person I was thinking of in the Belgariad, by the way. I do remember him just showing up and just
the knight who's just super awesome.
Yeah, he just shows up. I think his first thing is just grabs a guy and just breaks his spine, and then says, "Hello, my name is Mandorlan." And I always remember that one.
Yeah, because you can get a great pop with the guy with super magic takes on the guy who doesn't have any magic, but nonetheless kicks the hell out of people. Hida Casada in L5 Wars flavor text was, your knowledge will not save you, your magic will not save you, nothing will save you. And there's a bit in the later L5 War story where Ayuchiban has been resurrected, and they had to pick one of the Throtters is picking a character to beat him, and they picked Hida Casada one. The crab player won. They picked Hida Casada because Hida Casada was back in the dead at the time as well. And there's a bit where basically Aichiban is magicking everyone to bits, and Casada roars up because Casada's thing was he wore the armor of the Shadow Warrior, and the armor of the Shadow Warrior basically makes it incredibly difficult for spells to affect you. But Aichiban uses Maho, blood magic. Maho isn't spells. So he basically has him paralyzed, and basically he's just holding there, and he's going, and then he goes limp, and thing goes, sometimes that happens when I try to possess someone. They die instead. The will is too strong, they die instead. And then basically he steps forward to look at Casada, and Casada suddenly tangles his legs, flips him up, smashes him in the face with a Tetsubo, breaking his jaw. And so he can't speak spells. Goes up and goes, your magic will not save you. Wham! Your knowledge will not save you. Wham! Nothing will save you. Wham!
Dear God.
Amazing.
Yeah. That is definitely a another part of the fantasy, and it is of being the normal guy who, despite all this weirdness that's going on, you're the guy who just skill your way out of this, or knowledge your way out, or experience your way out of it. Unfortunately, since now everyone is saying, well, the best version of fighter is the one that can cast spells, that can be a bit harder to do.
I mean, as somebody who actually likes fighters who could cast spells on occasion, to play occasionally, like, having it be just the best choice just isn't great.
You can see what they're trying to do with stuff like Battlemaster, but because the virulent hatred for the Book of Nine Swords,
it's great stuff.
It had some great stuff, and it had reasons why your fighter had this limited pool of moves that they could then recharge, because it was talking about being in stances, being in the right zone, making sure that you were ready to do your specifics. They actually had justifications in the book, but because one of the classes had some supernatural powers, the whole thing just started becoming a meme almost instantly. And then we rolled over to Fourth Ed, where its mechanics were inspiring the game. The reputation of stuff like Battlemaster just sort of had problems to begin with, and people were assuming, it's the fighter who runs out of MP in 2 turns. And that wasn't what it was meant to be. It was meant to be a person with a warblade who goes into a battle stance, gets prepared, does a perfect attack or two, spends a turn, resetting themselves, and then launches into their next set of cool moves. And that's been lost along the way, like a lot of ideas from Third and Fourth Ed.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's been a little bit of a contraction, and I think we're better off being willing to shift some stuff around and maybe use some optional stuff where we would have that extra bit of space. But certainly, I'm always glad that when someone's got a comment and wants to chat about our ideas, we'll throw something up on the Discord, and we're happy to feedback on it.
Absolutely. And if there is an archetype in RPGs, fantasy, sci-fi, what have you, that you'd like to take on and really get into, I'm sure at some point we'll do the Decker and just lay out that problem in its entirety. But yeah, if there's something that you'd like us to deal with, to delve into its origins, where it came from, what happened to it, and where it is now, and where it could go in the future, we'd be more than happy to spend another hour of your life going through that. But at the moment, we've seethed our swords for the time being, we've hung up our helmets, and this party is over. Thanks for listening to The Adventuring Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there, or talk to our Twitter account @AdventuringPTY, or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty.
We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike 1.3 license.